We are here live with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She is just an outstanding, wonderful person to talk to, and I consider her a friend. Looking forward to a great talk. She practices muscle-centric medicine, which I think is a wonderful phrase. But you guys feel free to head on over to meetrx.com to catch the live stream and be able to answer questions. So the way this works is we have about 50 folks or so in the background. They'll be able to type in questions through the chat. I'll relay those to you as they come in as appropriate. Otherwise, we just have a conversation. So, all right, we'll get going. So, Gabrielle, where are you today? Are you still in California or are you back in New York?
Yeah, we're in San Diego. We got to come up to see you for sure.
Yeah, we're waiting. I'm waiting to barbecue some steaks for you guys. So come
We'd
on up.
love it.
You and Shane and a little.
You know, Shane's in medical school, so it's tight right now.
Gotcha. So, are they doing medical school with masks on and remote, or what?
Everything is remote, so we'll be here till November. We'll definitely get to come up and see you before
bring the damn computer. I got a Wi-Fi. You can do a class here. We can hang out.
I know. That's actually a great idea.
It's doable. But anyway, let me switch over to speaker view. Sorry, guys. There we go. So tell me, you had a little baby last year. How is she doing?
Amazing. It's interesting. She's actually in the 80th percentile. So she just turned 1. And you get pictures all the time.
You're not in the 80th percentile.
And wow. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm 5'1" and my husband is 5'9", although he says before the service he was 5'10". Yeah. And our baby, who is largely, she definitely is more meat based. She's in the 80 plus percentile.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And we do know that good nutrition yields better, at least in the population level, better height. And so that's a good thing. And my kids are the same way. They're all meat-based. They're not strict carnivore, but they definitely get a lot of meat. And then, as you may or may not know, we are in the process of also adopting. I'm 53 and my girl is 54. And so we're, adoption's our option at this point. Not based on me, I can tell you that. But anyway, so and we're definitely planning on raising that baby on a lot of meat and animal products and healthy food and maybe a little bit of fruit here and there type of stuff.
So that's actually exactly what we do. So this is child number 6 for you, right?
Will be child number 5 for me.
5,
I've got 4 others. Yeah.
It's interesting. I was recently reviewing some of the literature for the evidence for protein in children, and there hasn't been much change, and the studies are not great because they haven't done the studies. It's because it's typically isotope or muscle biopsy, which is a lot of the stuff we talk about with Layman and those guys. And the work I did at WashU, we did muscle biopsies. So you can't do that in 18 years and younger. Because I'm thinking we know the protein need as a child as it relates to breast milk, but after they're done with breast milk, the stuff is really archaic. The information is probably really undershoots the amount and need.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we look at, a child's development. The early years, obviously brain development is a huge thing that's going on. And so if we look at the composition of breast milk, a lot of fat, there is lactose and there's a protein in there. But, we're growing this, and it's a very high calorie, it's just a high calorie product. And so we got to grow this brain, this huge energy consuming brain, and this brain that grows bigger than any other species relative pound for pound. We've got the largest brain based on body size of anything. And that's also, if we look at optimal weaning, looking at other mammalian species, when they calculate brain size versus when we wean as humans, it clearly predicts a carnivorous mode of nutrition to achieve final brain size. And then for the first, certainly, inner utero, the first 2 years, and then it slows down a little bit until age 6. It's still quite a bit of brain size. The head, you look at a baby, they're all head and little body. So the focus, at least fairly early on, is on brain development. But then as we start to mature and start to be functional, walking, moving, then that muscle stuff comes on. So I think then you see probably an incremental need for more and more protein to support that structural stuff. And so again, I haven't looked into what are the RDA recommendations for pediatric protein requirement? Maybe you know that better than I do off the top of my head.
I don't remember. I want to say it's 2.2 grams per kilogram. So it's in the higher end. And what I found, and don't quote me on that, I don't remember exactly. But what I do know is that it's probably more important, the protein need per day. So, you and I have talked a lot about, and I think I've sent you a couple papers recently as they've been coming out, there's this concept of anabolic resistance and the protein bolus at one time, which, Shawn, look at you, you've done a fantastic job at maintaining and overcoming any kind of aging tissue, right? You eat protein at a minimum of 30 grams, you're probably more 50 plus per meal. Because as we age, that mechanism for protein sensing goes down. But with kids, they could probably get a very robust response, that anabolic, that mTOR response at 5 to 10 grams of protein. And that's interesting as we think about the transition of youth to more mature individuals and just what that need is. So from a younger standpoint, you're looking at the 24-hour period of protein, which is very valuable. But, as you age, the 24-hour period of protein is important. But if you are sub-threshold at any given meal, you are at a metabolic disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly, obviously, kids are designed to grow. I mean, that's what their job is.
Yeah.
I mean, so all the growth facilities and pathways, metabolic pathways, mTOR for MPS, muscle protein synthesis, those things, all you would think would be upregulated to the degree. And then once you reach maturity, the question is, like if I'm an athlete, if I'm a bodybuilder, am I still driving that pathway? Is that pathway important? As you and I both would agree, maintaining and gaining lean muscle mass generally probably has more advantages than disadvantages. Now, you don't have to be a giant bodybuilder, Mr. Olympia, take a bunch of drugs type of thing to do that. I think that's a different understanding. But and then as we know that for whatever reason, as we age, you talk about anabolic resistance. We know that insulin resistance seems to also lead to difficulty with muscle and hanging on to muscle. So there's that going on. And then also there seems to be problems with absorption. We see people lose some of the gut function. And I think that I don't really think that necessarily, in my view, is a direct only attributable to age. I think it's just disease. I think that people getting older, their guts stop working as well because they're diseased guts. It's not because necessarily they're older guts. So that's kind of a thought there.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because we haven't seen optimal aging. So now for the first time, we have groups of people that are perhaps implementing more traditional ways. We're smarter than ever before, right? So we have more access to information and more access to science, which is interesting, which kind of goes back to perhaps when we were hunters and gatherers, but we just have more access to information. We know how important vitamin D is. We know how important omegas are. We know how important and valuable certain things are. So that means that our optimal way of aging is yet to still be determined, right?
I would definitely agree with that. I think we I know what I'm experiencing in my 50s is not typical for the average 50-year-old, at least when I look around. And again, whether it's optimal, it's certainly not normal. And unfortunately, the norm these days is pretty sad, is what we see. When we look at the average person in their 40s and 50s, they're not doing well. I mean, that's the case. So clearly we're doing something wrong. I wanted to, I know Phil's asking a question in the chat about leucine requirements, and we know it's based to stimulate mTOR. It's 2.5 to 3 grams, typically based on a bolus. Is that still what the literature supports? Yeah,
the literature does actually support that. So it's roughly 2 to 3 grams per meal. I mean, you're closer to 3 grams depending on your age per meal. And you would say safely 9+ grams of leucine. Of course, leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids, but you can't just take leucine alone. And there was a great paper by Bob Wolf out of Galveston, Texas, and it was pretty controversial because he talked about how it's useless to just have the branched chain amino acids on their own. And I would argue that that's true because the whole point of having an optimal amount of leucine is really for muscle protein synthesis. But then the next step is, why do you care about that? And you care about that because you want to lay down high quality muscle tissue. And the way you lay down high quality muscle tissue is that you need the whole spectrum of amino acids. So you need all the amino acids, particularly the essential amino acids, to be able to lay down that tissue. So if you just provide leucine, that's like turning the key of a car without having any gas in it. So you're stimulating the process, but you don't have any of the building blocks.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I wonder, this is the one question that I have, because many, if not most of those studies on muscle protein synthesis, amino acid absorption and stuff like that. It's very often done in things like whey protein.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's obviously a different absorption profile and speed of absorption when it comes to something like
Hmm.
getting a steak in there. So I just wonder if that changes the trigger stimulus, because you have a more sustained release over time. I wonder if that, I'd love to see that data sometimes because, obviously you talk about you can stimulate mTOR about every 3 to 4 hours. And so
Yep.
it would mean, eat a little bolus of protein, eat another bolus of protein 3 hours later. That may be optimal. But again, those studies almost invariably rely on the rapid absorption of whey protein, in my view. So I don't know do you know if we have data on things like beef?
There's some coming out.
Yeah,
There's actually some coming out. I know that there's been some studies in review, so they will be coming out.
because that would be very interesting
Mhm.
to me, because my suspicion is obviously early humans were not running around eating whey protein every 3 hours. I mean, this
Right.
wasn't likely practical.
And the data suggests that it becomes exhaustive, that you can only stimulate it so much, and there is actually a threshold. So the concept of every 3 to 4 hours, yes, but then the robustness of that response, it needs a rest period because it requires ATP. So you need, one of the limiting factors for muscle protein synthesis is not just the protein in and of itself, but it's also the energy requirement, that ATP requirement. So,
Yeah, I mean, and that's when I've talked with, I think both Stu and Don and Jose Antonio, all those guys are big protein
yeah,
researchers, and they've all basically said, there's, getting the protein requirements, the leucine, the rest of the amino acids, but there's also the energy or the caloric surplus in a lot of cases,
right.
like a muscle building, not necessarily muscle maintenance or weight loss or anything else. You pointed the kids 2.2 per kilo. And that's kind of what we're seeing for maybe bodybuilding recommendations, which would go make the sense, growth is growth. And then,
And we'd have to look. I don't know if that number is correct.
okay,
It's
but
somewhere between 1.4 and 2.2.
yeah, I'm more familiar with the adult stuff
Yeah,
because I'm usually feeding adults and not babies. But the other
until
thing,
until soon.
yeah,
Soon that might change.
yeah, but and if we see RDA 0.8 fairly low, we've
Yeah.
got Don saying 1.2, 1.6 per kilo.
And I think that's conservative.
Yeah.
I believe, and him and he's been my mentor of 20 years, and we have a ton of great YouTubes on this exact discussion. I think that he's actually conservative
Yeah.
because there's no downside in consuming more protein. Right? There's never been any data to suggest that there's a downside to that. So I think he's conservative at 1.2 to 1.4.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I'll have to reach out to Don and see if I can get him on here because he's such a wealth. Hopefully he'll say yes. I suspect he might. He seemed like I was just really pleasantly surprised when I got to talk to him and how down to earth he was and fun guy to chat with. I do want to touch on the point. I in my experience, because I deal with a lot of people that have diabetes, and some of them, I would say that a higher protein diet for most people is very good for losing weight.
Yes.
I think that seems to work very well, even in many diabetics, not all, but many. But we do see some people with some higher blood glucoses as diabetics. And I know, let's delve in a little bit about gluconeogenesis, because as you know, gluconeogenesis is our liver's ability to make glucose from either gluconeogenic amino acids, alanine being a very important one, and then also a little bit from glycerol. But let's talk a little bit about gluconeogenesis and how maybe in the normal healthy person it differs than, say, perhaps a diabetic. Do you have any insight into that?
So, well, the first thing is typically a diabetic is, diabetic. You're not talking about type 1, but you're talking about type 2. Diabetes is really a dietary issue. Their diet is typically much higher in carbohydrates. When your diet is higher in carbohydrates, it doesn't have that need to generate its own glucose, as opposed to a higher protein diet, which goes, for every 100 grams of protein, you generate through gluconeogenesis 60 grams of carbohydrate, 60 grams of glucose. So the body has its capacity to do it on its own. But a diabetic type patient is ingesting a lot. The cellular metabolism is impaired. Insulin resistance, we know, starts in the muscle tissue. So their capacity to oxidize glucose is decreased. their hepatic ability to generate more fats, fatty acids, cholesterol is increased. So that would be my perspective. So the gluconeogenesis processes in a type 2 diabetic, I guess would be probably a bit impaired and underutilized because they're overfeeding.
Yeah, so that's obviously, like I said, most people become type 2 diabetics due to, nutritional issues. And, I'm just saying when we see people trying to normalize nutrition, particularly in this community where they're cutting out carbs, we're seeing some of them that, they skew either higher fat or higher protein. And initially they'll see elevated glucose levels with a certain amount of protein. They dial it back and it gets better. And then I think over time they tolerate it more and they begin to tolerate protein a little better. So
I think that, so I have seen this over years, and those individuals that have a higher protein diet tend to run a higher blood glucose, and that is just through gluconeogenesis, but their insulin level is lower because we know protein causes a phase 1 insulin response only, as opposed to carbohydrates. Anything over 40 grams, you're looking at a more robust insulin response, which is typically a phase 2 insulin response. So you have the preformed insulin and then you're making insulin. The individuals that are on a higher protein diet, their blood sugar does tend to run higher. However, it's through the process, like you said, of gluconeogenesis. Hemoglobin A1C is still on the lower end, and also insulin is on the lower end. So I think that that's something to really be mindful of. And there's no way that protein would stimulate even the same kind of robust response, the same kind of robust insulin response or blood glucose response as carbohydrates. Protein does not do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting about the phase 1 insulin response, because as you know, diabetics don't typically have a phase 1 insulin response. That's one of the problems. And so if you have, and I guess it would depend upon how much of a glucagon response you get to protein, because I suspect in fact, I'm pretty sure there is. And so when you get, as you know, glucagon and insulin compete, and glucagon tends to drive hepatic glucose production via both glycogenolysis, the breakdown of glycogen from the liver, and then also gluconeogenesis. And so it may be that, uncoupled response between glucose and glucagon, or insulin and glucagon that may be occurring with that. So it's interesting to see. Let me ask you about some people are asking about meal frequency and aging. Is it better to eat more frequently as you're older? Is it better to eat less frequently? What do you think?
What a great question. What a really important question, and I think an under-asked question, truly. So as you age, so first of all, there's 2 ways to stimulate skeletal muscle, which is an endocrine organ, and really the muscle is the organ of longevity. You're looking at resistance exercise and dietary protein. As you age, there is a natural propensity for the muscle to become more insulin resistant. It is typically that sarcopenic transition, which is a loss of muscle mass and function. The most important thing that you can do is to stimulate that tissue strategically. So I would say, depending on the goals, I would say 3 times a day, 3 to 4 times a day, if an individual will do that, would be more optimal to protect against sarcopenia. But for example, a guy like Shawn, who's so physically active, could easily get away with 2 meals a day because of his training schedule. So that training response almost replaces a meal because you are stimulating that tissue.
Yeah, so if we look at the stimuluses to muscle protein synthesis and so you're saying basically it's either protein or exercise, or ideally both.
Right.
And so if you're stimulating that pathway through exercise, you may not have to stimulate as much through protein.
Right.
Let me dig into a little bit more about coupling exercise, particularly resistance training, with eating protein, because I think, like, again, I'll point to Stu Phillips and guys like that will put out the caveat that higher protein recommendations usually include some resistance training in there. They usually go together. And so if you're sedentary, what do you see the difference? Neither of us are recommend a sedentary lifestyle, but sedentary versus an active person doing strength training, resistance training? How do we treat those differently with regard to
So an
nutrition?
individual who's sedentary arguably is going to need more protein. You still have to protect the tissue. You have to do whatever you can. This is kind of like a bed rest story. So if an individual was sedentary, or let's say they were bed rest or not moving, the most important thing that you can do is, if they're not going to be physically active, is you have to protect that tissue. And that would be making sure that you're getting roughly 50 grams of protein per meal. I would say put that in 3 times a day. A active aging individual, it's interesting. So when you do physical exercise, it makes sense that you bring more blood flow to the tissue. There's a lot of discussion in the community about, do you need to eat right after you train or not? My answer would be, well, why not? Eating after you train, especially if you're in an inflammatory state or in the area of sarcopenia or losing muscle or wanting to optimize muscle, you actually can lower your anabolic threshold. So you require even less protein and you get a more robust response because you've primed the tissue. There's more blood flow that's coming in. There's more nutrient availability. The tissue is essentially primed. So one great strategy for individuals is to consume protein closely after they're done training. And it's very well documented in the literature, especially with aging. And in fact, the literature indicates that you can make older muscle respond like younger muscle if you put them through resistance training and then give them high quality protein. And high quality protein is defined by that amino acid requirement.
Yeah, let's get into high quality protein in a second. There's a question coming in about, let's say you're older and you've got some, sarcopenic, insulin resistant.
Yeah.
Does that change the leucine requirements? Do you think those are now going up, and so we need to eat a little bit more in that situation?
Yes, it does go up a bit. So, I say 2.5 to 3 grams to be safe. The reality is, if you're younger, you could get away with 1.8 grams of leucine, which is less, but I would rather give the information to provide a more robust response so nobody misses out.
All right, protein quality. There's a lot of information out there saying that all protein is created equal. You can get the same amount of protein from eating beans as you can from beef. What are your thoughts on that? What information we have that either supports that or that?
It's interesting. It's the concept of changing biological values, right? The reality is steak is different than broccoli. I don't care how you decide to do it. The amino acid profile is different, period. And, these are hard, fast biological values, The amino acid profile is different. High quality animal-based proteins feed high quality animals. Plants, could you get enough amino acids from quinoa? Sure, you need about 6 cups and you need about 700 carbohydrates. And, the other aspect is the nutrient density. You're looking at B12, zinc, selenium, iron. This is not very bioavailable from plants. So there's the high quality protein argument. Could you do it? Could you grow muscle on a plant-based diet? It would be very tough. It'd be very tough. Very suboptimal, truly. Humans weren't really designed to do that. And then when you think about, again, all those other aspects like iron and zinc and the things that you need for normal hormonal function and just tissues, it's not adequate.
Yeah, I would say suboptimal is a pretty good word for that. I think there was a study, you may be familiar, I think they matched basically for leucine and for branched chain amino acids. They pretty much supplemented people. Again, these are both isolates. These are sort of an animal isolate versus a plant isolate. Same number of amino acids, same ratio, same quantities. One coming from a plant source, one coming from a animal source, and looked at the serum response and saw that the plant sources saw a 40% lower peak in those values, even with the same, even when you match the amino acid profiles, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I know that the isolate probably doesn't have fiber content, but it's typically bound. Those amino acids are bound. And the other aspect that I think is not discussed enough is that with plant-based proteins, you're looking at higher levels of estrogen activity. I think it was University of Iowa. I have the paper on my Instagram, but it compared the some of the myths out there, this current nutritional narrative that talks about how there's all these hormones in beef, and it's not how that happens when it comes to market. Whereas pea isolate has way more estrogen activity, way more hormonal activity.
Yeah, I guess to be fully complete on that, you would have to contrast phytoestrogens versus animal estrogens, and they may have a differential tissue response. But really, when you look at the amount of hormones in beef, and I've seen this before, particularly with regard to estrogen. As a male, I make a certain amount of estrogen. Believe it or not, we all make estrogen, even as males. Females obviously.
Don't tell my husband.
Yeah, but we do have a little bit. Some men seem to make more than others, it would seem. But the equivalent amount of beef you would have to eat to make the amount that you already make as a male is something like 27 entire cows. So unless you're eating 27 complete cows every day, the amounts are so inconsequential that argument is just it doesn't make any sense. Also, be fair, eggs have more estrogen than beef does. Milk has more. Organ meats have more than beef. If you're really worried about that, I don't think that's a big issue. But again, we can look at soy. We can look at all these other foods out there that have just thousands of times more estrogen, and you point that out. Let me see your thoughts on. What are your thoughts on taking branched chain amino acids? And is that something you need to supplement your diet with? Is that something that maybe if your diet is deficient, you might want to do that?
If you're eating a primarily meat-based diet, you likely wouldn't need to supplement branched chain amino acids. However, if you are reducing your calories for any reason, for example, when I was competing in fitness and figure and I was under caloric restriction, my protein level would be high, but there would be times where perhaps I'd be really hungry but wanted to get an extra protein meal in, but my allowance for whatever that day was, that meal was 3 ounces of protein. That would be 21 grams of protein, which we know is subthreshold. So throwing in branched chain amino acids to that lower content meal definitely can make a more robust response. If an individual is vegan or vegetarian, branched chain amino acids would be helpful to those meals. If you are having just a lower quality meal, say you're having a small amount of fish, that would be a good time to utilize branched chains. But the reality is, if you are eating more of a protein forward style diet, you don't need extra.
Elaborate on a lower quality protein. You said fish. I haven't really heard that before. Why did you say fish?
So fish has 5 grams of protein per 1 ounce. So it's not that it's slightly lower than, say, beef or chicken or gravity bearing protein, which has 7 grams of protein per 1 ounce. So if you
is that a fatty fish, or is that even
any
like
fish?
Really
it's just it's based on the quality of the tissue, because gravity bearing animals just have more protein per ounce in their tissue than, say, fish. So for example, if we wanted to get to a more anabolic response, you need 7 ounces of fish per meal. So that would give you 35 grams of protein.
Yeah, that's not a problem for me. I'm not, I'm just I'm sitting here going 2 ounces, 1 ounce, again, outside of, like I said, people that are really severely caloric restricting themselves.
Right. But you're a large human. So if if I'm not going to eat 7 ounces, I'm a tiny person. That would be a good time to, maybe I'm going to get 5 ounces. So if I'm eating 5 ounces of fish, then I'm looking at 25 grams of protein, which is suboptimal. If I'm eating 3 meals a day or 2 meals a day, I want to make sure I'm getting that 50 gram amount. So that would be a good way to utilize branched chains.
Just in your training, and I haven't asked you about this before, maybe you've touched on this at some point in the past in your training or at some point, creatine. Have you looked into creatine much? Obviously it's a supplement that's been helpful. I remember when creatine first came out, gosh, about 25 years ago, and I used it, and I actually found that it seemed to help a little bit for me. Cramping was one of those one of the side effects of. Is that what are your thoughts on cramping? There's some people that still suggest that that's a problem with that. What are your thoughts?
I actually think creatine is great. It's also an antioxidant. in meat, right? So it's mostly found in meat. I think that, there's some effect for brain function. And this really just goes to the fact that perhaps a more protein forward diet would be beneficial. I mean, creatine is found in meat. I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any plant sources of creatine. I mean,
I don't believe there is. I mean, I think it's carnitine that shows up a little bit in asparagus, but I mean, it's minimal. I mean, I think creatine is purely an animal product. And as you probably are aware, it has tremendous benefits also for brain health. I mean, we're seeing some really neat stuff on that. And there's in cardiac health, there's a lot of reasons for creatine. And so I think getting it from, one of the other benefits of eating, meat in the diet, basically.
And this is one of the supplements that I often recommend. In fact, I put it in my last newsletter. I recommend 5 grams a day. I think that I trained in geriatrics. That was one of my postdoctorate training at WashU. And creatine was something that there was and had been a lot of research coming out about as it relates to protecting brain function and, of course, muscle. So
let's talk a little bit about I guess older folks, resistance training. I mean, I think that's clear. You would be an advocate of that, but can people, is there an age threshold where you can't continue to put on muscle?
I think it's a really good question. I don't know that answer. Personally, I feel as if individuals can always improve, right? It wouldn't make sense that you couldn't improve. That being said, the more well-trained you are, the more difficult it is to put on muscle. I mean, if you're lucky, you could put on, there's so much variability. The literature is pretty consistent, 1 to 2 pounds a month, depending on your training status. But, guys like my husband, he can put on more than that. So it depends. I think there's a genetic component to that as it relates to at what age. I think that I think that you can always get stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you my look at the literature as an orthopedic guy. I used to look at this stuff, and I did see strength training in 80s was beneficial. People in their 80s, and they were able to demonstrate strength gains. And I think it's let's talk about muscle versus strength a little bit. Do you see a difference between the two? What are the benefits of strength and/or muscle mass for longevity, for health?
I mean, strength is the concept was, it's interesting, both strength and muscle mass, the higher both of those are, the lower the morbidity and mortality, and that's well documented. And typically people lose strength prior to losing mass. So really maintaining both is it's vital.
How do we do that? What's the prescription? What's the minimum effective dose? What do we all need to be doing?
It's interesting, and this comes out of Stu Phillips' lab, and he says that it's really not about the heaviness of the weight, that it is really about the volume and the perceived exertion. So volume is really important, making sure that your training has adequate volume, and that's going to be different for every individual depending on where they fall on the training spectrum. 3 to 4 days a week, and I think from an obvious kind of thought is the harder that you can go, the better. The heavier that you can go with the more volume, perhaps the better. But, having a really well-designed program it's just like having a well-designed diet.
Yeah, and I think, and I've read a lot of Stu's stuff. I think he's a great guy. One of the concepts they talk about, and I think of the word like Brad Schoenfield's stuff talking about how much weight do you need to use? And I think you can get that stimulation, that muscle fiber recruitment through obviously very heavy weights. You're going to do it for sure, but also with some lighter weights down to, I think, around 40% of your 1 rep max, done to a level to where you actually have to reach that. Some people call it failure, but and there's different ways to go there. Would you agree that recruiting those muscle fibers is the key intensity variable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I see people going through the motions a lot of time in the gym, and I think it's something that most people don't train hard enough. I think that's the bottom line. I think
totally. It's kind of if you're going to go to train, your mind has to be there, which is one of the reasons I think that you're so physically successful, is you're able to just tap in and get the job done and be single mission focused. And that's really a valuable trait, which is something that people don't really talk about. You know, we talk about the execution of the plan, but with the execution of plan, there has to be a particular framework for operating, like an operating system at which the individual is executing. And that really involves high quality focus and effort.
Yeah, I mean, I call it switching on. Sometimes it's flipping a switch. You know, you have to really be able to, and then, you know, like I said, you don't need to spend a lot of time sometimes, you know, but you have to get the quality in. And I think the quality and frequency, like you point out, are very important. And yeah, I know if I'm not switched on mentally, it's almost like I shouldn't even done that.
Right.
So it's kind of one of those things you have to do that. What's your training like right now? I know just had a baby and other things going on physiologically. What are you able to do these days? And
so I do a lot of kettlebells.
Yeah.
I have a really structured, today was a pressing day, a pressing swinging day. And that's 4 days a week. So I do an hour of kettlebells, and some days are heavier, some days are lighter. Like today was a lighter pressing day and a 55-pound swings.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the kettlebells. I think they're just, you know, like I said, particularly now where so many people are locked in homes and they may going to gyms a criminal activity, which is, you know, bizarre because you can go to a bar or a friggin' restaurant and drink.
Totally.
Go to a cigarette shop and go to that. You know, if you got things to do at home, that's a nice piece of equipment. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it at home. There's commercial products, there's heavy sandbags, there's, you know, weighted vests. I've got all of the above. I've been doing this stuff. I've got so much stuff. The fortunate thing for me is I've spent so much of my life being interested in fitness that I've accumulated just tons of stuff so I can train at home forever and pretty much do everything I need to do, which is fun. You guys, so San Diego, he's in school. Are you guys going to be there like full time now, or how's that working for you?
So we're planning on being here till November. So we'll definitely be coming up for a couple workouts.
Great. I look forward to it. Yeah. So is his school, where is he going to school then?
Rutgers. He's at Rutgers.
Oh, okay. So that's back east.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's at Rutgers, but everything is remote right now, and New York's a little bit of a mess. So, you know, we left and came here. For people that don't know, my husband was a SEAL for 10 years. We have a lot of connections here in Coronado, San Diego area.
I mean, he was a Navy SEAL, not a SeaWorld SEAL, right? Yeah.
Right. Right. That's right.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And and like we asked about, little baby is doing well.
Oh, she's so cute. Yeah. She's so advanced.
Yeah, you send me pictures all the time. It's great.
I know. I mean, she's just, a guy who's got 4 kids and then going to have 5 can totally appreciate the cuteness and the, vivacious nature of the child.
That's fun. You know, they're fun, and then they start moving, and then they become, you know, then you got to worry about them killing themselves all the time.
She is nonstop. So it's interesting so she started walking at 10 and a half months, and she's nonstop.
Yeah, they don't slow down, and then I think I can't remember the age when you're not worried about them killing themselves as much. I think maybe 5 or 6 when they're not going to run in front of a street. And, you know, my youngest right now is just about to turn 8.
Okay.
So we can kind of leave them alone, and, you know, not have to watch them every 5 minutes and that type of stuff. And then we get this new little one in, so it'll be, I guess I'll be 75. Still chasing little kids around. How old
are you adopting this number 5? How old?
It'll be a brand new baby.
Oh, that's incredible.
Like 3 years old or something, 3 days old or something like that. So it'll be changing diapers and doing all that stuff. So that'll be interesting. So I'll get less sleep apparently.
You're going to call me because the last time you did this was 8.
Yeah, no, I know it. So anyway.
And they've got really cool stuff like Velcro swaddles.
No, okay.
Trust me, you don't have to do any of this stuff, like the pocket scroller, and
that'll be a lot of fun.
I got it covered.
Let's see what else. Anything else we need to cover on proteins? I'm going to see if anybody has any particular questions out there. But
I want to just mention this, that it's interesting. In the medical community, people are saying, oh, you know, protein is really bad if you're diabetic because there's an increase in branched chain amino acids in the blood, right? So then you're going to add more, and it's interesting when some of that data came out, and it's really just the impact of the screwed up metabolism. Everything spills back into the blood. You've got higher levels of free fatty acid. You have higher levels of glucose. You have higher levels of amino acids. It all makes sense. It's not that the amino acids are the problem. It's the obesity, the muscle insulin resistance happened first. It's not the protein's fault. So
you know, what I understand about that, and I've talked to Ben Bickman about this too, because that is being put out there as, you know,
right.
there was a relationship between branched chain amino acidemia and higher correlation in type 2 diabetes.
Right.
But what we're seeing is it's kind of a chicken or the egg type of thing. And so what we're seeing is, you know, a lot of times we see muscle breakdown in the diabetic. And so, or we see resistance of the branched chain amino acids getting absorbed because we don't have the insulin effect working, which would normally help towards muscle protein synthesis. So we have this backward situation. So branched chain amino acids tend to accumulate. And there's studies out there looking at dietary branched chain amino acids, which show no increase in glycemic or problems, you know. So I think you're right. I think it's a chicken or the egg thing. I think that the branched chain amino acid appears because of the diabetes. It's not the other way around.
Right. It's not. And so I just think that, you know, as I think about some of the arguments that people are saying to go more plant-based, which is really disgusting. I truly do feel this way because I'll get these journal watches. Do you get those journal watches? Whether it's Medscape or Journal Watch?
I get the Medscape stuff, and y'all see that in there, and it is. I mean, there's obviously it's a lot of marketing. I mean, honestly, I think this is all marketing. It's all based on, you know, the fact that Silicon Valley is pouring hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars in plant-based and trying to generate this quote unquote $150 billion market. And so we see this, you know, huge push to push this narrative on us. But yeah,
it's a problem because then you get it from the top down. So you get these physicians that buy into this information when it's epidemiological data or even really poorly designed randomized controlled trials or whatever it is. You know, so it's just something to note that the information from the top down is just, it's really impaired. Do you guys ever cover studies in the community here?
Meetings?
Yeah.
I do, you know, I do. So, well, I mean, a lot of times we're talking with folks, but that's something I'll do in the meeting occasionally. I'll bring up a study and kind of chat through that if there's an interest. I mean, a lot of times we've got so many people in here, a lot of it's just answering questions directly and I'm welcoming new members all the time. But you know, we could certainly have a journal club, you know, that would be kind of
maybe we could do that maybe once a month, see. And
we have on this platform, we have about 160 physicians now that have signed up, and there's kind of a loose form. We haven't developed that to the degree that we probably could, but I think, you know, maybe we could do a journal club, you know, and just kind of go over some stuff that's germane
I think it would be valuable, you know.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great to have a little round table and that type of stuff. So that's something we've talked about. So I would be very open to that. So we could advertise that and get it going. We certainly have the platform to do so. You know, we get, you know, 5 or 10 physicians and scientists and other people that have an interest and just kind of go through literature, pro or con, you know, because there's a lot of disinformation. And as you know, a lot of journals, a lot of articles are poorly designed. The conclusions don't match what the actual data shows. You know, a lot of people, you know, they read the journals and they take the findings at face value, and they don't, you know, unfortunately, much of our medical information or nutrition information comes from news headlines, which first of all, badly interpret journal findings and, you know, they promote things that aren't necessarily held up by the data.
Totally. Couldn't agree with you more. So,
all right, well, let's make that happen. So we can, you know, if you want to, if you want to send some, well, obviously I always appreciate when you send me articles. Some of them I've already read, but you know, as you know, there's I don't know how many journal articles come out a month. It's probably in the tens of thousands.
Yeah, I just got one sent to me about leucine, and it was interesting. It says that leucine is not required for muscle protein synthesis or something. And if you look at the study, it was younger men, 25 years old, that were well-trained. So, I mean, leucine isn't going to have a more robust response.
I think, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I think alanine also has an effect on mTOR triggering. So I guess maybe if you had enough alanine, perhaps maybe huge amounts of alanine without much leucine, you might be able to do it. I mean,
the exercise in ATP alone is a stimulus, you know. So,
Yeah, we should really touch on this before you go. Because there is also a lot of literature coming out, guys like Walter Longo and some of these other folks saying that
Yeah.
mTOR is going to shorten your life. mTOR is going to give you cancer. And I say it's far more nuanced than that. What say you?
So let's talk about that. mTOR is in every tissue, right? So mechanistic target of rapamycin is a complex. So it's a protein complex in every tissue, in the brain, the liver, kidney, pancreas. This is really interesting. Muscle, the mTOR complex in muscle is exquisitely sensitive to branched chain amino acids. The mTOR complex in liver is much more sensitive to insulin or carbohydrates or overeating carbohydrates or energy. So if the argument is that mTOR causes cancer, now, first of all, mTOR is a growth, it's a growth mechanism. It wouldn't be an initiator. So it wouldn't, number one, initiate cancer. It's more of a growth promoter. So if the argument that mTOR is bad, stimulating it, then the argument would be exercise is bad. And the other concept that if you really cared about overstimulating mTOR, then you wouldn't be eating a high carbohydrate plant-based diet, period.
Yeah.
So it's just
calories. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that stimulate him. So I'm just wondering why they've decided to narrow down on protein.
Because they're anti-protein. It's purely agenda. It doesn't fit their narrative. And it's And I sent you the
Don's criticism.
I sent you that. Yep, I sent you that.
I published that many times to try to get that information because I know. Tell the story about that because Walter Longo could put out this study that everybody quotes. Levine and Longo. That
IGF-1. There was an IGF-1 relationship to cancer, and they butchered the data so much that guys like Don Layman, Stu Phillips, I think Doug Patton-Jones was in there, just the whole group of really high integrity, high quality scientists. So they were recommending that you need 0.3 grams of protein per kilogram, something way below what would even be considered healthy. And the data was so bad that these scientists got together. They had other statisticians look at it. They had the evidence. They were like, this stuff is all inaccurate. And they wrote a letter to the editor with all the statistics, and they didn't publish it because the guys on the paper that published this about IGF-1 were part of the editorial board.
Yeah. I heard that at Cell Metabolism it was a journal, and I think Longo's on the board or was on the board.
Right, that's right.
So it's like, you can't criticize my study. We're not going to publish it.
It's outrageous. Yeah, and, it's outrageous because it just perpetuates a narrative, and it's interesting because these individuals must not see patients, or they must not have seen patients at the end of their life, because you would never make that recommendation. You would never make that recommendation. Survivability is related to muscle mass. Survivability of cancer, cachexia is what kills people. I mean, it's one of the things that kills people of cancer, this highly catabolic state. The more muscle mass you have, your ability to maintain muscle tissue is directly related to survivability.
Yeah, and that's something, if you go into your 60s already depleted, I mean, you can't take a joke at that point, one little fall or one small illness and you don't have much reserve.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, this has been great. Like I said, I still look forward to seeing you in person, seeing your little one in person and meeting Shane.
Can't wait.
And I got a freezer full steak, so you guys will have to do it. I know next weekend I'm heading up to a ranch. There's a regenerative agriculture ranch just up the road from me, and so
amazing.
I've been invited up there to hang out with the ranchers, so that'll be fun. So we'll have a fun time.
Great.
Anyway, well, anybody else, any last questions for anything or anything else you want to relay to us through our?
No, if you guys have questions, feel free to DM me. My Instagram is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I do my best to try to answer everything. This conversation that we're having is really, really important. And I applaud you guys all for being so open-minded and seeing that perhaps there is a better way. And
I 100%, I agree, and I thank you for supporting. Let's make that journal club thing happen. Let's work on that and get it done.
That'd be great.
Phil, I'm going to the 5 Bar Ranch up in Trabuco Canyon. I know he asked it in the chat. Anyway, Gabrielle, tell us where people find you on Instagram, on
Yep.
social media.
You guys can find me on my website, drgabriellelyon.com, and I have a free protocol that you guys can download for free if you're transitioning to a more carnivore style diet, or you want my perspective on how I design nutrition plans. It's totally free. I also have a newsletter, and I put 2 or 3 scientific studies and just valuable resources. It takes a couple hours to put together, so it's really high value information. Great YouTube. I've got a whole bunch of YouTubes with Dr. Donald Lehman, my longtime mentor of 20 years, believe it or not, where we talk about some of the studies, and we just talk about some of the information that's coming out, and try to just bring you guys evidence-based information. And on Instagram, I'm very active. And that's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Lyon. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. Look forward to seeing you in person, giving you a
All
hug.
right, friend.
And,
Yeah.
we'll talk to you later. You guys all take care, and we'll see you back tomorrow.
Bye.
Actually, before I go, we have another one. I've got Dr. Pran Yoganathan from Australia. He's a GI specialist, also a carnivore diet advocate, so we can talk about GI stuff today at 3 p.m. Pacific. So for you guys that want to do round 2, I'm also lecturing at Low Carb USA again today, so I got a busy day of busy Sunday. Plus, I got to work out. All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Bye. See you soon.